Okay, so with the Israel-Iran stuff popping off, and it is 2 o'clock Eastern Time on the 14th of June, 2025, as I'm making this. With all this stuff, I just wanted to kind of go through and make a little video about the history of what has been going on in the Middle East. Also, lol. Um, anyways, so I'm going to refer to this map, uh, probably more at the end after we get through everything. There's another map right here. So this is what Palestine looked like 1946. This is the result, essentially, of mostly the Havara Agreement between Hitler and the Zionists, which most people don't know about. I think it was 1933. There's a lot of context that you don't learn about World War II, and it's like that for a reason. But anyways, Hitler had an agreement with Zionists to send them out of Germany and into Palestine because the global powers kind of saw this as an eventuality, the creation of an state of Israel. Okay, so I'm going to refer to this. I actually probably won't really refer to this too much, but this is kind of what has happened, and this is what I'm going to be explaining, is the process essentially from this time period, 1947, the Civil War, through 2012 and current day events. And so to understand what has been going on in the Middle East, you have to understand Israel conflict history, because every single conflict that has happened in the Middle East since Israel has been there, the common denominator is Israel. Okay. And so you can see up here, I've got, these are mostly open sources. I'm going to be just basically reading from these. You see we have Wikipedia articles, I have some Google searches, I have congressional records. These at the end right here, we're going to talk about specifically the Iran conflict and the developing political situation and how badly Trump has messed up. But we will get there. And so we'll start with the 1948 Palestine War. Okay. And I'm just going to basically read this. You can mute, read along, you can pull these sites up, whatever, these pages up, and you can read them yourself. But this is how it starts. Okay, so the 1948 Palestine War was fought in the territory of what had been, at the start of the war, British-ruled Mandatory Palestine. So again, this is the, when we get to them talking about the Mandatory Palestine, this was the plan. This box right here is the plan. Okay. During the war, the British withdrew from Palestine. Zionist forces conquered territory and established the State of Israel. Conquered territory and established the State of Israel. Remember, they already had this territory, okay? So remember that. By the end of the war, the State of Israel had captured about 78% of the former territory of the Mandate. Kingdom of Jordan had captured and later annexed the area that became the West Bank, and Egypt had captured the Gaza Strip. The war formally ended with the 1949 armistice, established the Green Line demarcation, and this is the first of many wars, okay? So I had two main phases. The Civil War, which I had mentioned, essentially right when these things started gearing up and the Jews got established and the Zionists got established in Israel, they immediately started a war, okay? So it began on the 30th of November, day after the UN voted to adopt the partition plan for Palestine. Again, see, you can see in the map right there, that is this map. So they voted to adopt this. Israel didn't like it. They started attacking everybody. During this period, the British still maintained a declining rule over Palestine and occasionally intervened in the violence. Not really, as you're going to see. Initially on the defensive, yeah, right. The Zionist forces switched to the offensive in April 1948. We're going to show just from this article that this is not true. Well, this and another article. This is not true. In the anticipation of an invasion by Arab armies, they enacted this plan, an operation aimed at securing territory, whatever. In anticipation of an invasion by Arab armies, we're going to tell you why. You're going to see why they anticipated this invasion in a little bit. Okay, the second phase began on the 14th of May, 1948. This is a very important date. Okay, we're going to come back to this. With the termination of the British Mandate and the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel, essentially what happened was this is when Britain officially moved out. Okay, they relinquished everything and they left. The following morning, the surrounding Arab armies invaded Palestine, beginning this 1948, this war. Okay, the Egyptian line advanced in the southeast, while the Jordanian Arab Legion and the Iraqi forces captured the central highlands. Syria and Lebanon fought with the Israeli forces in the north, so you can see this stuff. So Egypt's coming in here, this area, Jordan's over here, Iraq comes in over here with Jordan, Lebanon, Syria up here in the north. This is how everything is situated over here. Okay, so they fought with the Israeli forces in the north. Newly formed IDF managed to halt the Arab forces, and in the following months began pushing them back and capturing territory. Okay, so this kind of sounds like at this point that the Jews are just kind of chilling out in Israel and the Arab armies invade. That is not what happened. They admit down here during the war, massacres and acts of terror were conducted by and against both sides. Definitely true. A campaign of massacre. I mean, this is just war. Like it's just war. Acts of terror, like that's just war. War is killing people until they give up. You can call that terrorism. It is terrorism. The definition of terrorism is using fear or violence or threats of violence to basically get a political end that you want, which is what war is. But anyways, a campaign of massacres against the Arab population. You got this stuff. Okay, here we go. Led to the expulsion and flight of over 700,000 Palestinians. With most of their urban areas where mostly they lived, population centers are concentrated and amassed in urban areas, as we all know, being depopulated and destroyed. This violence and dispossession of the Palestinians known today as the Nakaba. So let's look at the Nakaba. The Nakaba, it's the catastrophe is what it means. That it is described here as the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian Arabs through their violent displacement and dispossession of land, property, and belongings, along with the destruction of their society and the suppression of their culture, their identity, their political rights, and national aspirations. Okay? Essentially, what happened is Israel, when they got there, they got established, they started this civil war, they started killing people. At some point right here, you can see there was a big attack on something, which is this when history defines the starting point as the Nakaba. Realistically, the Nakaba started back when we talked about with the start of the civil war. Okay, and I'm not going to try to pronounce this, the Balad whatever massacre by the Israelis. They killed a bunch of these people. Essentially what they were doing is the Jews were going door to door and they were killing people in their homes. They were doing this in neighborhoods. They were doing this in suburbs. They were doing this in cities. They were violently expelling these people. Okay? And so it's referencing the Palestine War, which we just talked about, mandatory Palestine, all this stuff, Palestinian refugees. But also take note of this date. 31st of December, 1947, okay? During the foundational events, Nakaba, okay, so here we have again this 750,000 figure, and then it says it's to present. The Arab countries and the Arab people, and certainly the Palestinians, are going to maintain that this has been ongoing. And as you're going to see, they have a foundation to argue that. Okay, anyways, dozens of massacres, yada yada. We saw this in Gaza. We saw them funneling out through Egypt, and they were bombing the civilians as they were running away. We saw all this stuff. We saw, they've basically completely destroyed Gaza, whatever. I'm not going to get into all that. So now again, 31st of December, 1947 is when history says this began. 31st of December. So basically, essentially, we'll just say January 1st, 1948. Okay, now let's come back up here. 14th of May, 1948, it says that the surrounding Arab armies invaded Palestine. And it said that, where was it? It's somewhere in here, right here, in anticipation of invasion by Arab armies. Why did they anticipate this invasion on the 14th of May or the 15th of May, the day after this? It's because For the last half year, the Jews had been slaughtering the Palestinians. And the other Arab countries, they could not do anything about it until the UK left. So the instant that the UK left, the surrounding Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, they invaded Palestine, quote unquote, invaded Palestine. They went into Palestine to prevent Israel from slaughtering their brothers. Okay, this would essentially be the same thing as if some country went and established themselves in Canada, just some foreign race, foreign religion, hostile to your way of life. They came in and they started killing Canadians, and we went in and saved the Canadians. That is the quote unquote invasion into Palestine by the Arab armies. Okay, we talked about the Nakaba. Okay, America's foreign policy. Okay, this is... Foreign policy is not something that's taught in school. It is extremely important to understanding the development of geopolitical events, things like wars, things like economic changes, all of this stuff. But primarily in this video, obviously, we're going to be talking about wars. Okay. So here we go. The U.S. recognized Israel. So this is during the Truman administration. The U.S. recognized Israel shortly after its founding in 1948. Okay, so we agree that Israel is a country. During the Eisenhower administration, so this time period, 53 to 61, the U.S. maintained a policy of neutrality to avoid alienating Arab nations and preventing Soviet influence in the region. Okay, as we just saw with Iran and Russia signing their compact, basically as a response to Israel's attack on Iran, the Soviets were basically kind of backing the Arab nations, and the U.S., no one was really... The only people that could be said to have been backing Israel was essentially the UN, primarily the UK. The Balfour Declaration is when, you saw British mandated Palestine. It was the UK that gave, and so they're probably the primary ones that would have been, quote unquote, backing Israel at this time. The U.S. provided Israel with moderate amounts of economic aid just for food and things like that, infrastructure development. We're going to get to the Suez Crisis. But at this point in time, in 48 through 63, as we're going to see, this is, as hard as it is to believe, the United States took a position of neutrality. I know that that is virtually impossible for you to believe, given the political climate today and the way the U.S. treats Israel. But basically what was going on for the U.S. foreign policy is they wanted everything to be balanced, because we did not want what is happening right now. We did not want an arms race in the Middle East. And so what that means is keeping the scales balanced. Okay, we're not giving our weapons to Israel because, first off, Israel has already started off the bat showing that they are hostile and they are leading unprovoked attacks. And we're going to see more of that. But generally, as a position, just generally in the Middle East, the U.S. did not want an arms race. And so we want everything to stay balanced and equal, okay, through till 1963. Nuclear weapons in Israel, okay? There's all this stuff, they take a policy, deliberate ambiguity. They're like, oh, we don't have them, or we're not saying we don't have them. We're not saying we do have them. Israel's got nukes. They have probably, right here, it says it right here, I'd say a couple hundred, but they've got between 90 and 400 nuclear warheads. Also, a thing to touch on, by F-15s. Who gave them those? The United States. F-16s. Who gave them those? The United States. Dolphin-class submarines. Who gave them those? The United States. Okay? That's going to come up later again. Let's see, where is it? Right here. Here we go. This is a tangential event. What I'm about to talk to you about, the JFK assassination, is such an unbelievably complex subject that people have dedicated their adult lives to understanding it. But I am going to cut all of the stuff out and I am going to show you what happened. Okay, here we go. Throughout the spring and summer of 1963, the leaders of the United States and Israel, President JFK, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, and Levi Eshkol, were engaged in high-stakes battle of wills over Israel's nuclear program. The tensions were invisible to the publics of both countries, and this is the reason why JFK got assassinated. If they were public, then I don't think he would have gotten assassinated, but we'll get there. The tensions were invisible. Only a few senior officials on both sides were aware of the severity of the situation. According to this guy, Eshkol, Ben-Gurion's successor, associates, Kennedy is presenting Israel with a real ultimatum. This guy, the Israeli Air Force commander, seriously entertained the fear that Kennedy might send airborne troops to Dimona. This is where they have their reactor, their nuclear reactor. There it is, right there, the Israel's nuclear complex. Okay, on March 25, 1963. Okay, dates, again, March 25. CIA director discussed... Oh, wait, no, that's not... Okay. According to McCone, he raised the question. So basically, at this point, JFK is like, all right, he's going to his people. He's like, give me a risk assessment of Israel getting nukes. And like I just talked about, this whole balance of power in the Middle East, he's like, what is this going to do to the Middle East if Israel gets nukes? Okay. Then he instructs the National Security Advisor to go with the Secretary of State and CIA and get all this stuff. How some form of international or bilateral U.S. safeguards could be instituted to protect against the contingency mentioned. The nuclear capability is the contingency. Also meant the next informal inspection of the Israeli reactor complex must be undertaken promptly and be as thorough as possible. On April 2nd, 1963, the ambassador meets with the prime minister, presents the American request for the Israeli ambassadors or not, the Israeli prime minister's assent to semi-annual visits to Dimona, perhaps in May and November, with full access to all parts of instruments in the facility by qualified U.S. scientists. Apparently, the prime minister was taken by surprise. Why would he be taken by surprise? Well, it's pretty obvious. It's because they were developing fissile material at this reactor. Okay, he responded by saying the issue would have to be postponed until after Passover. So we have the first delay. And you're going to see this in a minute. They just delay until JFK gets assassinated, which that year ended on April 15th. To highlight the point further, 2 days later, he summons these ambassadors that are talking together to the State Department and presented him with a diplomatic démarche on the inspections. This message to Ben-Gurion was the first salvo in what would become the toughest American-Israeli confrontation over the Israeli nuclear program. The toughest confrontation was over allowing American scientists to inspect the reactor complex to determine whether or not Israel was manufacturing fissile materials for a nuclear weapon. On April 26, 1963, more than 3 weeks after the original U.S. demand concerning Dimona, Ben-Gurion responded to Kennedy with a 7-page letter that focused on broad issues of Israeli security, regional stability, claiming that Israel faced an unprecedented threat. He called it an unprecedented threat. He invoked the specter of another Holocaust and insisted that Israel's security should be protected by joint external security guarantees to be extended by the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Now let's recall what we just talked about. Their quote-unquote unprecedented threat would have been in response to Israel ethnically cleansing Palestinians. That is what they're worried about. They are worried about another reaction because this is basically, 15 years afterwards, and tensions are still high. And by the way, from 1948 to now, there's not really peace. There's little skirmishes all over the place. Kennedy, however, was determined not to let the prime minister change the subject. On May 4th, he replied to the prime minister, assuring him that we are watching closely the current developments in the Arab world. As to Ben-Gurion's proposal for a joint superpower declaration, Kennedy dismissed both its practicality and its political wisdom. Kennedy was much less worried about an early Arab attack than he was by a successful development of advanced offensive systems, as you say, could be dealt with by presently available means. Okay, let's go back up. What is this? America at that time and currently it's not even our intelligence capabilities. It's not even close. Not even close. Remember back up here, he's like, Kennedy's going to everyone, CIA, National Security, Secretary of State. He's like, we need to find out what is going on, all the risk assessments now. And it's in preparation for this discussion because he anticipated that they were going to pull some shit like this and be like, oh, well, we need nukes because the Arabs are going to attack us. Well, Kennedy, after using the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world, determined that the Arabs were not going to attack Israel. And he was more concerned with Israel developing a nuke. Kennedy would not budge on Dimona, the reactor complex, and the disagreements became a pain in the neck for him. Confrontation escalated when the State Department, so they send the letter over June 15th for immediate delivery to Ben-Gurion. In the letter, Kennedy fleshed out his insistence on biannual visits with a set of detailed technical conditions. Okay, we're at June 15th right now. Remember when we first talked about this was April 25th. Okay? And then delay. Oh, the Passover. Oh, delay. Okay, now he's like, again, I'm serious about this. So what do? They delay again. Ben-Gurion, how do they delay? He resigns. Oh, we can't make a decision. I just resigned. Oh, darn. We need to get everyone stood up. We need to get the new guy in, get him up to speed, all this stuff. Okay. Stunned his country and the world. He never explained in writing or orally what led him to resign. What led him to resign was that he was delaying the United States sending scientists to look at their reactor complex. Okay, that is why he resigned. He denied, of course, that his move was related to any specific policy issues like the ongoing, what was it called, toughest confrontation over the nuclear program had nothing to do with it. And the fact that Kennedy wanted to send scientists in May, remember in May, we're in June, he wanted to send them in May. He denied that his move was related to any policy issues, question, whatever, yada yada. Pressure played a role, remains open to discussion. That's why he resigned. Let's be honest. Okay, now we've made it past May, and we're in July 5th. So we still haven't sent scientists to check and see after Ben-Gurion was surprised that we wanted to send scientists to see if they were developing fissile material. Okay, now we get the letter. He's got the letter. The new guy's got the letter. Immediately apparent that his demands were akin to an ultimatum. Okay? Constituted a crisis in the making. Why is this a crisis in the making? Why is, if you just have a civilian nuclear reactor for power and you are not developing fissile materials, why is allowing the United States to check to see whether or not you are developing fissile material, why is that a crisis? Why? Why do you think that that's a crisis? He's stunned. In his first interim response, again, more delays on July 17th, requested, again, more time to study the subject of whether or not they are covertly developing fissile materials in this reactor complex. Okay. The premier, whatever, noted he had hopes that the friendship would grow under his watch. Israel would do what it had to do for its. Israel would do what it had to do for its national security, for the unprecedented threat that did not exist for its national security. Remember, okay? And to safeguard its sovereign rights. Again, threat didn't exist. Arabs weren't really trying to take over Israel to plan any massive attacks. We checked. It wasn't there. Okay, apparently wanting to mitigate the bluntness of the letter, whatever, blah blah blah, factual, more what nonsense. Okay, diplomatic relationship. Oh, complicated if it was left uninspected. Yeah, I wonder why. Okay, let me just take this time real quick to explain America's foreign military policy as it relates to nuclear weapons is non-proliferation. We do not want anyone else to develop nuclear weapons. The more people that have nuclear weapons, the more risk there is for nuclear war. That is just an undeniable fact. That is our policy. Okay, so that is the undertone of all of this, and Israel knows this. Israel understands, and remember, again, at this point in time, we have a policy of neutrality. We aren't BFFs with Israel. Israel isn't our quote-unquote greatest ally at this point. So in the late... All right, hang on, where did I leave off? 6 weeks. Okay, here we go. More and more. Okay, now we're in August. After 6 weeks of consultations that generated at least 8 drafts, he goes over. Okay, now we finally get a written. Okay, again. We are in August to get to a written reply on demands that were known on April 2nd to Israel. The first letter was sent on June 15th, and now we're in August to get a response to these demands, which again were to allow our scientists to go to this place to see what they had going on. All right? He wrote, given a special relationship between the two countries, he's all of a sudden, okay, I'm going to allow regular visits. We're going to allow it. Okay. On the schedule, however, he suggested that late 1963 would be the time for the first visit. Remember, we asked for May and November, late 1963. So I guess it's going to be the November time. By then, he wrote, the French group will have handed the reactor over to us, be undertaking general tests and measurements of its physical parameters at zero power. Nuclear reactors take time to start up and shut down. Anyways, vague on the proposed frequency of the visits, disregarded his demand for biannual tours while avoiding a frontal challenge. Again, delay. Having considered this request, I believe we shall be able to reach an agreement on the future scheduled visits. Okay? To end the confrontation, he assented to regular visits, but note that he didn't say, come on over right now. More delays for the schedule. He didn't accept the idea, here it is right here. He did not accept the idea of the prompt visit that Kennedy wanted. Of course he wanted it. He wanted the first visit in May. We're in August. All right? To avoid making an explicit commitment to the biannual inspections, okay? Did not reply. Basic agreement. Reply did not mention whatever. Okay, and then here we go. We just kind of skip JFK's assassination. Kind of crazy. Okay, so then what do we get? I'll show you what we get, but then I'm going to go back to JFK's assassination, okay? The first one took place in mid-January 1964. This is after JFK was assassinated. Yep, right here, 2 months after the assassination. They told American visitors that the reactor had gone critical only a few weeks earlier. This says the claim wasn't accurate, whatever. They acknowledged a year later that it became operational mid-1963. Yada, 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 biannual visits. Turns out LBJ, they sent one guy. Where is it? They sent one guy and then they kind of never did it again. Is it in here? Oh, 6 American inspections, whatever, once a year. Sent them for a little bit, whatever, we're gone. Okay. Here we go. This is when Google thinks that Israel got weapons. IRR2 went critical. The IRR2 is Dimona. It's the reactor. This is the reactor complex that Kennedy wanted to inspect. Went critical a month after JFK was assassinated. The reactor goes critical and likely helped Israel produce its first nuclear weapon. Okay, so they're delay. They delay. JFK gets assassinated. And what is the toughest American-Israeli confrontation over the Israeli nuclear program, the toughest confrontation, again, based on America's concern that Israel is producing nuclear material, JFK gets assassinated. Now, at this point, a lot of people will be like, oh, I mean, I don't know what happened. A spade is a spade. Israel assassinated JFK so that they could have nuclear weapons. They delayed. They even had one of their prime ministers resign. They assented, and then they delayed the schedule. They didn't let the prompt visit happen. And then all of a sudden, the reactor goes critical a month after JFK is assassinated. And then the first inspection goes through whatever under LBJ. And LBJ, by the way, it just so happens, just coincidentally, not only did they get fissile material a month after JFK dies, but then, all of a sudden, we end the arms embargo. Okay, here we go. Kennedy administration ends the arms embargo on Israel. So this is what happened. The Kennedy administration was like, all right, we hear you, but you can't have nukes, but we will let you get other non-nuclear weapons. That was part of a compromise that Kennedy had made with them. Okay, so we start getting security ties, all this stuff. Where is the... Does it not talk about the 60s? Essentially what happened is that in the 60s, here we go, Israel achieved nuclear capability. In the 60s, under the LBJ administration, we start giving Israel our military stuff. We start giving Israel our military stuff. So now they have nuclear weapons, and they have our military equipment. Best military equipment in the world at this time. Okay, now we get to the Suez Crisis. Okay, the second Arab-Israeli war. What happened? Okay, so remember, in 1948, all this stuff's going on. Egypt comes in and they seize this right here. They seize this area to control the Suez, all right? And you've got all this stuff. This right here, you got the Red Sea out to the ocean to get to international maritime trade, and you've got the Mediterranean Sea. This is an extraordinarily strategic area of the Middle East. Arguably, this area is probably the most strategic area to control because it also goes up into Europe, but another area is right here in Saudi Arabia where they have all their refining stuff right here on the Eastern Peninsula, and then you've got the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf, and all this stuff is another one. But okay, so this is the area we're talking about right now. So what happened? The UK, France, and Israel, they invaded Egypt in 1956. Okay, again, we have another act of hostility by Israel and friends, admittedly. Okay, so they invade on the 29th of October, having done so with the primary objective. And remember, at this point in time, Israel does not have nuclear weapons. They do not have our military capabilities. I kind of skipped ahead to get to the nuclear stuff, but I should have done this first. But anyways, so this is why they need Britain and France, because Israel at this point in time does not have the capabilities that they get in a decade from this point. All right, so really what they want, Egypt's like pissed off with Israel. Everyone's pissed off with Israel for ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. They decide they're going to close the Straits of Tiran. Arguably pretty important. Basically like a physical embargo on Israel and trade and stuff like that. It is a national security interest. Frankly, I'm not going to argue that it's not a cause to go to war with a country. It is. But the fact remains that Israel and friends invaded Egypt, okay? Blockade, after issuing a joint ultimatum for a ceasefire, the UK, France, joined the Israelis, seeking to depose the Nasser and regain control of the canal, earlier nationalized by transferring administrative control to the new government Suez Canal Authority. All right, so they're basically invading Egypt. Shortly after the invasion began, the three countries came under heavy political pressures from both the United States and the Soviet Union. Because remember, like I talked about, what is the goal? What is the goal of America's foreign policy and the Soviet Union's foreign policy? What is the goal? It is balance in this area. It is balance. And so despite the fact that we had just fought a war up here with Europe, or in Europe with France and in England and the UK, despite that, they started an invasion and the US was like, knock it off right now. And they did. And the Soviet Union was like, knock it off right now. Okay? And so, because remember, they want neutrality, they want balance. The US and the USSR the Soviet Union, they do not want an arms race in the Middle East that they're going to have to deal with. Okay? And that's basically what happened. Oh, here we go. Here's where we get the weapons. This is what I was wanting to talk about earlier. All right, so the U.S. initially provided, so remember, up until JFK dies, the 60s, U.S. initially provided economic aid, but was hesitant to sell weapons directly due to concerns, what I was just talking about regional stability. Okay, this changed. Okay, so we get the first direct arms sale. We get that. Hawk missiles. All right, this again, Kennedy knows it's all about trying to balance power. It's all about trying to balance. Hawk missiles, according to Kennedy, was a balance. Okay. Following the 6-Day War, we'll get into that. That's going to come next in 1967. U.S. policy shifted, and then we started selling them everything. We started selling them everything. They have nukes. Remember, sometime around here, they have nukes. And now they're getting our stuff. Remember when I highlighted the F-15s and the F-16s? That is our military equipment. In 1968, cemented the U.S.'s commitment to maintaining the qualitative military edge. So, we went from neutrality and regional stability with Kennedy, and then not only just purely coincidentally did Kennedy die and Israel gets nuclear weapons, but also the incoming administration deviates from U.S.'s policy, the long-standing policy from Truman to Eisenhower through Kennedy for regional stability, and we just start pouring on the gas. We place our thumb on the scales, and then what happens? Then guess what starts to happen? Like now we start getting anyways, I'm not going to talk about the Cold War and all that other stuff. I'm just going to focus on this. Okay, we're talking about the Yom Kippur War, significantly increasing military aid to Israel. Special aid packages. At this point, it's going to be my contention that the U.S. government essentially the decision to assassinate Kennedy came when Israel had basically completely infiltrated the U.S. government. And I'm going to talk about that as we get towards the end of this. And so that is why. Because Americans don't want war in the Middle East. But who wants the wars? We've seen it. Israel wants the wars. Who would want to support war in the Middle East? Israel would. We don't want it. We want regional stability. The people don't want it. It's just like today. Like what? All the polls today, like 90% of Americans don't want war with Iran. Guess what we're doing? We're in the Iranian conflict. And we're going to talk about that more at the end when we get there. But that's what's going on. We put our thumb on the balance and we shift it to Israel. Okay? 6-Day War. 6-Day War, another act of Israeli aggression, known as the June War, whatever, fought between Israel and Arab states, primarily, again, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Lasted for 6 days. Imagine that. It's called the 6-Day War. Military hostilities broke out amid poor relations, whatever. This is basically what we've talked about to date. the conflicts that we've talked about to date, this is the ongoing poor relations. Still like skirmishes and stuff. The skirmishes really just kind of never stop. Since the armistice agreement, after the end of the first Arab-Israeli War, tensions over the Straits of Tehran, which we just talked about, the Suez Crisis we just talked about, tensions became dangerously heightened. Israel reiterated, and remember, look at, okay, so the date, 1967. What were we doing? We started giving them aid. They have nuclear weapons, okay? This is what happens. Okay, so the UNEF deploys peacekeepers to the Egypt-Israeli border. Okay, so we've got peacekeepers here. The months prior to the outbreak, they're deploying these guys. They're like, everyone knows, like, something's about to happen. So the UN deploys peacekeepers. Again, you know, we have this closure on the Straits of Tehran. It's the same thing again, same basis as the last conflict. They call it a casus belli, however you pronounce that. It's just something to justify a war. Nasser says that he's closing it. He's like, nope, y'all suck. We're not doing this. And then mobilizes the military and orders the immediate withdrawal of the UNEF personnel. On June 5th, as the UNEF was in the process of leaving the zone, Israel launched a series of airstrikes against Egyptian airfields and other facilities in what is known as Operation Focus. Okay, so this is another thing that you're going to see happened with Iran, and we're going to talk about it at the end. This is, as some might say, a dick move. Because basically what was going on was the UN had not evacuated at this point. Because Egypt was like, this shit's going down. Y'all need to get out of here. And they're all waiting for the peacekeepers to leave. Israel's like, nah, we're going to catch them off surprise by attacking them preemptively before the UN can get out. Okay. Initial resistance, whatever, by the 6th day of the conflict had helped occupy the entire Sinai Peninsula. Was that map up here? So they take all of this. Which is this. Remember, we talked about this is the part that Egypt has, and this is the Suez, all that stuff. Where was I? Right here. Okay, getting closed. No, hang on, we're back here. We're down here. Okay, so then they agree to a ceasefire. Jordan gets involved. They're basically just it's called harrying the advancing forces. They're not directly engaging them. They're just engaging them from a distance to try and slow them down. They agree to a ceasefire, signed with Israel, whatever. 6-day war is over. Okay, here we go. And this is where you're going to start seeing disparities in casualties and things like that. Okay, so 15,000 Arab fatalities. Israel suffers fewer than 1,000. Why is that? Equipment. Alongside the combatant casualties, there were deaths of 20 Israeli civilians killed in Arab forces airstrikes in Jerusalem. 20 is not that bad, honestly, for the airstrikes that they were doing. Okay, essentially what happened here, what happened was this war started off, the preemptive strike by Israel. They tried to destroy like all of Egypt's air force. And so the remaining Air Force, they're trying to strike military targets, whatever. 20 Israeli civilians get killed in this exchange. Any death is obviously going to be bad, but those numbers aren't bad. But here you go. 15 UN peacekeepers were killed by Israeli airstrikes in the Sinai at the outset of the war. Because remember, they attacked before the UN peacekeepers were able to leave, while they were evacuating. And they killed UN peacekeepers. And guess what the UN didn't do? Anything about it. Guess what else happened? Now, this is something that very few people know about. 34 U.S. personnel were killed in the USS Liberty incident when the Israeli Air Forces struck a research ship. A research ship by the way. This is one of our SIGINT ships. Top of the line, cutting edge. SIGINT is signal intelligence. This is like intercepting communications and things like that. That is what the USS Liberty is. So let's come down here to see what they have to say about it. Okay, sailing 13, whatever. We're monitoring the conflict. Obviously, we're monitoring the conflict. We have a vessel. We can intercept and decrypt everyone's communications because, again, like I said earlier, we were at the time when JFK was president and have been since then the premier intelligence-capable country in the world. So we have our ship parked out there just to monitor the situation. Okay. Attacked by Israeli jets and torpedo boats, nearly sinking the ship, killing 34 sailors and wounding 171. They say that the attack was a case of mistaken identity. Yeah, right. And we're going to talk about that for a little bit. I don't want to get too in depth. I'm going to touch on this, though, mainly because hardly anyone knows about this. They misidentified it as the Egyptian vessel, however you pronounce that, which is this. I'll show you this. I won't spend a lot of time on it. Here you can see the differences if you want to pause it. Two rows of portholes. The structure's different. All this stuff. Here you can see the comparisons. They look a little similar, but not really because of this thing right here in the middle. The portholes, you can see the differences. Admiral Thomas Moore, to suggest that the IDF couldn't identify the ship is ridiculous, because not only does this ship not look like this ship, but we obviously would have had American flags, and we did have American flags on it. So here you go. If you don't believe, so I saw it was like Walsh or Kirk, Mike Walsh, by the way, all you need to know about him, just look up a picture of him without his beard. That's all you need to know. Don't like him. Don't like Charlie Kirk either. I think I saw videos, one of those two guys, calling the USS Liberty strike a conspiracy theory. So I want to take the time to read Congressional Record Volume 150, Number 130, which is the, essentially, here, where is it? Findings of the Independent Commission of Inquiry into the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, the recall of military rescue support aircraft while the ship was under attack, and the subsequent cover-up by the United States government. This was done in 2004. So what happened? Let's see. We, the undersigned, having undertaken an independent investigation, yada yada, eyewitness testimonies from surviving crew members, a review of naval and other official records, examination of official statements by the Israeli and American governments, a study of the conclusions of all previous official inquiries, whatever, considerations of import. One, that on June 8th, 1967, after 8 hours of aerial surveillance of Israel looking at our American flags, and having 8 hours to identify our vessel, to try to contact our vessel, they launched a 2-hour air and naval attack against the USS Liberty, the world's most sophisticated, again, there you go, most sophisticated America, inflicting 34 dead, 172 wounded. I think the other thing said 171. Anyways, whatever. 172 wounded American servicemen. Casualty rate of 70% of the sailors in a crew of 294. It lasted approximately 25 minutes, during which time unmarked Israeli aircraft dropped napalm canisters on the bridge, fired 30mm cannons and rockets into our ship, causing 821 holes, more than 100 of which were rocket size. Survivor estimate 30 or more sorties, and a sortie is basically like a strafing run by, or just a plane attack, flown over the ship with a minimum of 12 attacking Israeli planes, which were jamming all 5 American emergency radio channels. Torpedo boats surfaced, attacked, not only firing torpedoes, but machine gunning of the Liberty's firefighters and stretcher bearers as they struggled to save their ship and crew. They returned to machine gun at close range. 3 of Liberty's torpedo boats later returned to machine gun at close range. 3 of the Liberty's life rafts. So they're attacking the life rafts that had been lowered into the water by survivors to rescue the most seriously wounded. Okay, a deliberate attempt to destroy an American ship and kill her entire crew. Evidence of such intent is supported by all this stuff. This is what happened. I could read through all this. You can read through it. This is what happened. Israel, when they're over here, Israel captured somewhere between 120 to 150 Egyptian soldiers. They had them detained. They had them unarmed. And an order came over the radio to commit a war crime and massacre them. And they did. And the Liberty intercepted it, and then Israel blocked the Liberty's communications. They tried to destroy it, and then someone in the American government, when the Liberty was able to get a distress signal out, hang on, where is it? Where was it? Yeah, I lost it. Oh well, when they were trying to get a distress signal out, they got one out. The U.S. sends interceptors, sends planes to help them, and the planes turn around. They turn around. Okay, I'm going to get back to this stuff. I just had to talk about this because this is the idea that Israel is an ally of ours, much less our greatest ally. I think up to this point in time, I think you can kind of understand the truth of that statement. I'm going to stop right here. This is going to be part 1. Hopefully it recorded everything.